All right, here we are again. So what we have to do today is take a look at this sample midterm that we put together last time. And let's see. It's long, isn't it? It's quite long, as a matter of fact. So, all right, so we'll go over this today. And then, well, if there's any time left over, we'll go back into chapter 12, which we just started last time. In fact, let me get it open and remind us where we were. Let's see. Oh yeah, the long and short term factors. Okay, so we got up to around, let's say, oh, I think I know where we were. The asset market model. All right, so we'll get back to that in a bit. But first, what we need to do is go over the sample midterm. So let's get this open and let's take a look at it. So it has a bunch of fill-ins. Now, these are all taken from the chapters that are based on international trade only, which means 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right. So all of these questions are taken from 2, 3, 4, or 5. Some of them are word problems. Some of them are fill-ins. Some of them require graphs. So you'll have a little bit of everything. And let's see. Hold on one second. Oh, no, this is not what I wanted. What I did was I actually put together a series of calculations in Excel for some of the problems that we'll be looking at in the sample midterm. Okay, wait a minute. Yes, that's right. Oranges and avocados. That's the one. Okay, very good. So then we'll use those as we go along and we'll go over how they were calculated. All right. So now in the meantime, I haven't quite finished writing the first midterm. It's almost ready, but I'll tell you what it will do because it's not ready today. We'll go over this, of course, but the actual midterm, I should have it ready in the next day or so. So what we'll do is this, because today's already Monday the 5th, how about if we do this? Let's look at the calendar for a second. Today's the 5th, Monday the 5th. So what we could do then is we could have the midterm be due. Oh, that's interesting. It's got Sunday in the last column. That's unusual. All right. I mean, not what we're used to. Let me see if I can find another one. There we go. So yeah, how about if we make the midterm due a week from Thursday? How about that? That would be the 15th. I think you'll have plenty of time to do that. And so yeah, especially since it probably won't be ready until at least tomorrow. So that way you'll have more than a week to do it. And you know, it'll be a little time consuming, but it certainly shouldn't take a whole week either. So I think you'll be fine. Okay, so I'll make a note of that. It'll be due on the 15th. Now, in the meantime, though, there will be a second midterm, which is based on our first looks at international finance, which means the trade and the balance of payments, and chapter 11, which is fairly long, our introduction to the foreign exchange markets. So we'll figure that out maybe next week sometime. But for right now, we'll focus our attention on this one. And then, of course, there'll be a final, but the final is a take-home final. We can give it out during the last week of classes, which I believe is the first full week of May, if I remember correctly. In fact, we could look at the schedule right now. Oh, is that the right one? Yes. According to this, the week of the final exams is May 13th. Oh yeah. So we've got plenty of time. Don't worry about it. Yes. I just want to make sure we can squeeze in both midterms and the final. But according to this, the final exam week is the week of May 13th. That's like in 6 weeks. So we'll have no trouble, 7 weeks really. Well, no, 6, whatever it is. It's still plenty of time. So we'll have that to work on our second midterm. And then, of course, we'll have a final exam. The final exam, whatever it is, will only be based on the last couple of chapters that we've done. It will not be comprehensive, believe me. It'll just be whatever the last section of block of chapters is that we happen to have gone over. All right, so let's get these out of here and let's get back to work. So let's begin with our fill-ins. And so in each of these cases, the answer will typically be maybe a sentence, maybe a few words, maybe it'll be a single number. These are not meant to be long and complicated. For example, let's take a look at the first one. Under what doctrine is international trade viewed as an instrument of foreign policy? And that would, of course, be mercantilism. All right, mercantilism, that's the one where trade is just another instrument of foreign policy. The goal of, according to the mercantilist, is to make ourselves as well off as we can, even if it comes at the expense of our trading partners. Now, who first introduced the concept of absolute advantage? That would be Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations. Okay, so all you need is to know that it's Adam Smith. And if you're not sure about any of these, all you have to do is open up your notes for chapter 2, and it should be right there somewhere. All of these were taken directly from the notes. Let's put it that way. Nothing in here was taken from any other sources. So there's Adam Smith with absolute advantage. And of course, in mercantilism, one of the key details is that trade is seen as an instrument of foreign policy. All right, what's next? What does a production possibilities curve or frontier show? They both mean the same thing. You can use them interchangeably with each other. Production possibilities frontier, production possibilities curve. I believe that came up in the next chapter. No, we needed it here. What am I saying? We had one right here in our example of trade between England and Portugal, if you recall. Let me find that real fast. There it is, production possibilities curve. It's this curve, which in our case turned out to be a straight line, which is one case that we could run into. It shows all combinations of two goods that can be produced by using all available resources as efficiently as possible. Okay, so we can just basically borrow this. Why not? It's right there. So the PPP, or production possibilities curve, shows all combinations of two goods that can be produced by using all available resources as efficiently as possible. Now, since this is an English answer, I mean, I can give you credit for there's a lot of leeway here. As long as it's clear that the graph shows what we can produce when we use our resources efficiently. Okay, now consumer surplus, where did that come up? In the notes, I mean. I think that may have come up in chapter 3. Let's go look. Or maybe it was 4. Oh, it was 4. I remember now. It was introduced in the appendix. So consumer surplus represents or measures the difference between the price that consumers pay for a good and the price that they were willing to pay for it. Okay, so typically consumers in a market end up paying less for a good than the maximum they're willing to pay for it. So the spread between what they actually pay and what they were willing to pay is known as consumer surplus. Now, with producer surplus, it measures the difference between the price at which producers are willing to sell a good and the price that they actually charge. Okay. Now, what happens to the consumer surplus when the price of the good rises? Well, if you're not sure, let's see what examples we had here. All right, I'll tell you what, let's draw a picture of it real fast so we can visualize what's going on here. But I mean, intuitively, it should be clear that higher prices are bad news for the consumer. So it stands to reason that consumer surplus would fall when prices rise. So here's why. Oh, let's just make up a quick example. So that's our original consumer surplus. And so here the consumer surplus is 1/2 of the base times the height, which equals 1/2 of the base, which is 50 right here. The height is right here. And that's 5. So this product is 125. All right, so let's just say that for whatever reason, the price goes up. So using the same information, in fact, let me see if I can steal this diagram and do it again. Let's try the case where the price, let's say, goes up to 6. Okay, so with the new higher supply curve, let's put it here. Okay, so the new consumer surplus is right here. It's always everything between the price and the demand curve. So now consumer surplus equals 1/2 base times height. The base is 40, the height is 4, and that's going to leave us with 80 compared to 125 that we had earlier. So you don't have to obviously go through all these steps, but the bottom line is when the price of a good rises, the consumer surplus falls. Okay, and that's again because we're paying more for a product and we have less of it. Therefore, it stands to reason that we'll end up with a lower consumer surplus. But at the same time, though, producer surplus goes up. Okay, so like here, for example, the original producer surplus, let's say it was down here. One half base times height, 50 times 5, it's the same. The price goes up, and so now all of a sudden, let's see. Yeah, see, this is going to be hard to do because we don't know. Let's say this number is 3. No, let's make it 1. Yeah, not sure how well I'm drawing this thing. See, now in this case, the problem here is that in this case, the supply curve shifted to the left, so the cost of production presumably went up. So at a higher price, oh, sorry, no, the height is 5. Sorry, the base is 40, and the height is 5. So this one went down as well, mainly because the cost of production had presumably gone up. So it's what's happening here is that what's happening to the producer surplus is it's also going down, but that could change under different circumstances. So we'll just say here that in general, the producer surplus. Oh, you know what I just realized? This is the wrong one, isn't it? Yeah, because here they ask about the price of the good falling. Oh no. So so that means I'll need a separate diagram for this one. All right, hold on a second. This one is fine. We'll leave it as the starting point. And so here in part 7, or part 6 rather, it says here we want to assume that the price goes up. But I just realized that in this part, the price goes down. So I'll need another diagram, not this one. And we'll see what happens. All right, so what we'll do now is we'll shift the supply curve in the other direction. All right, so let me just grab this one and see what I can do. No, it doesn't want to work. All right, so what I'm going to try to do is show what happens here when the price drops. Yeah, it's going to be a little tricky. I just need some space. All right, that should do it. So what I'm going to do is shift the supply curve the other direction in this case, just to see how the market reacts. So you know, I'll tell you what. Let's make a completely new example. Just because this one is going to run into problems. So this one will be the example for part 6. Let's put it that way. Part 6, we start here, and then we let the price go up, and you can clearly see that the consumer surplus dropped. This one, I'll have to start again with a different example because otherwise it's not going to work. Let's say that we start here. We have a demand curve. And let's just say that here's the price is 10, here the quantity is 200, and here's our supply curve. But the supply curve does not have to cut through the origin, by the way. Let's say that here the price is 2. And where they cross, let's say the price is 6 and the quantity is 100. So right now, the producer surplus is this section. And then the price drops. And let's say there could be a few reasons for this happening. Let's say the reason why the price drops is because the supply increased. It's also possible that the demand decreased. So the price is, let's say, down to 1. And the new quantity is 110, and the new price is 5. So we'll end up with so in this case, it went up slightly. So yeah, let's just note here that the price can rise or fall depending on why, or producer surplus can rise or fall depending on what causes the price to drop. Because you can see it could go either way. If I change the demand curve, then I would end up with less revenues. But because I've increased the supply curve, I end up with more. So let's just leave it at that. Without knowing more information, we don't know exactly what caused this. So it can actually go either way. All right. Anyway, so an import quota, this is a numerical limit. On the import of goods, or the quantity of a good that can be imported into a country. Now, we've already seen several of these examples. After there's an imposition of a tariff, when a tariff is imposed, the producer surplus rises because that's the purpose of this. And the consumer surplus falls. Okay. That's why the producers lobby for this tariff, because they know that it will increase their producer surplus. But of course, consumers are opposed to this because it lowers their consumer surplus, because they end up paying more money for a product of which they can now buy less of it. Whereas with the producers, they can now sell a larger quantity of this product at a higher price. Oh, you know what I just realized? This is actually two separate questions. Sorry. Let's move this down here. When a tariff is imposed, the producer surplus rises for domestic producers, of course. But down here, I just realized this is a separate question. What happens to the consumer is that when a tariff is imposed, the consumer surplus falls for domestic consumers. And what happens, by the way, to the domestic consumer and producer is the opposite of what happens in the foreign country. So, in other words, right now, this tariff is making producers in the foreign country very happy, or unhappy rather, and then the foreign consumers are actually quite happy. Okay, now, according to which theory of international trade does a comparative advantage arise from the availability of resources? This is chapter 3. This was our discussion about different theories of international trade, which are related to our discussion about consumer and producer surplus. But there's different ways of explaining why trade takes place and what factors give rise to it. These theories don't really contradict comparative advantage, but they do try to provide a more meaningful explanation as to where the comparative advantage comes from in the first place. Like here, for example, this theory doesn't disagree with David Ricardo, but what it is saying is we're trying to explain why one country has a comparative advantage, or in other words, why does it have lower opportunity costs? Because it has more resources. So the actual name of this thing is called the factor endowment theory. And it was by two Swedish economists, Heckscher and Olin. Okay, so this is in chapter 3. Let's just put a little note here. Chapter 3. So if you're looking for this, that's where you'll find it. Okay, now, according to Stolper Samuelson, also found in chapter 3, what happens to the price of a resource used to produce exports? In other words, if the United States sells aircraft in foreign countries, then we're looking at what happens to the price of capital in the United States, and that is assumed to increase. Their theory is telling us that if the United States focuses on aircraft and sells that abroad, then because it's primarily made with capital, the price of capital should increase in the United States. Okay. Now, internal economies of scale, just in general, let's just take a detour here. What is an economy of scale? Economies of scale occur when the per unit cost of production decline as more output is produced. Specifically, if you've ever been in a micro class, what we're talking about here is average total cost. So in other words, here's a graph in which we have dollars on the vertical axis, output here, and this is our average total cost curve. And so what you notice about this curve is that the average total cost curve declines as more output is produced because Q is output. And so therefore, this company or industry is experiencing increasing returns to scale, as it's sometimes called, or economies of scale. They both mean the same thing. But it turns out now that we can define economies of scale in two different scenarios. So internal basically means, and again, this is all chapter 3, internal economies of scale arise when the average total cost or average per unit cost of production, or the per unit cost of production of a good fall as more output is produced. But this is only restricted to the same industry. So in other words, when they say internal, they mean internal to that industry only. So only in this industry is this happening. So you can imagine what the next one is. External economies of scale arise when the per unit costs of production of a good fall as more output is produced. For the entire economy. All right. Now, intra-industry trade. Now, by the way, here's an interesting little side note here. The prefix is intra versus inter. Okay, so how would we explain this? Suppose that you might remember in high school where you may have participated in what were called intramural sports. Means within the same school. So in other words, you're playing a game like football or baseball or whatever, but only against other people in your same school. And then technically, although you never heard this word being used most likely, intramural means between schools. Okay, so just remember those prefixes, intra versus inter. Inter means within the same organization. Intra means between two different organizations or possibly countries. So intra-industry trade would mean between countries, So that's the intra part, but specifically of the same types of goods. For example, if the US exports Cadillacs to Germany and imports Mercedes from Germany, this is known as intra-industry trade. So here, yeah, it's a little confusing the way they've described this, but the intra part means between countries, but it is specifically the same type of product. So I guess maybe it's not the best name they could have come up for this. But in other words, the question is, Adam Smith and David Ricardo would have been surprised to see the United States both exporting and importing cars from Germany. I don't believe that their theories leave any room for this kind of thing, but now it's clear that we can think of them as being more or less not even the same products. Cadillacs and Mercedes are both very nice cars, but they're not exactly the same thing. So some consumers in Germany might prefer a Cadillac to a Mercedes, and some consumers in the United States might prefer a Mercedes to a Cadillac. So that's why this kind of thing can happen. But in David Ricardo and Adam Smith's time, you didn't get like essentially the concept of brand names. It's not brand new, but in those days, products were much more similar to each other. You wouldn't have had dozens of different cars to choose from, for example. So they wouldn't have really thought about trade in these terms. They were thinking more in the big picture terms, like, one industry versus another, as opposed to different goods within the same industry. All right, now ad valorem, of course, is Latin. It just means that it is a percentage fixed percentage of the market value of an imported good. For example, if the ad valorem tariff on imported liquor is 25%, then a $10 bottle of rum imported from the Bahamas would end up costing $10 plus 25% of $10, which is $12.50. Okay, so in other words, it should have cost $10, but that 25% tariff made the price go up to $12.50. All right, so while they're at it, just for the fun of it, let's check this out. It says here, in proportion to the estimated value of the goods or services. Okay, that's what we figured. But I really was kind of dying to know. It just means, according to the value. Well, what do you know? I like that. It makes sense. Okay. All right. I like it when words are used correctly. A cartel is a group of companies or possibly countries that have decided among themselves to charge the same price of all consumers for their product. For example, OPEC is a cartel that sells oil. The members attempt to maximize their profits by maintaining rigid quotas and charging and ensuring that each member charges the same price. So I just want to mention here in passing that a cartel is illegal in the United States. So you don't see cartels in the United States, but you might see them outside the country. And it could be essentially a group of other countries that have decided to band together and charge the same price to maximize their profits. It would be like, imagine if all the oil companies in the US got together and said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to stop competing with each other. Why don't we all charge $5 a gallon for gas? Nobody will then have any choice. If they don't like our prices, they can't buy gas at all. So something like that would be illegal in the United States. But if it happened, it would be an example of a cartel. And you can see how profitable it could be. If they all said, no, we're just going to charge $5, there's not much people can do about it. That's exactly what will happen. All right, now an example of a non-tariff trade barrier, there's many different ways in which trade can be restricted. Two of the more important types are known as quotas and what are called voluntary export restraints. Okay, so those are two ways besides tariffs that trade can be interfered with. In other words, the government can restrict trade from coming or products from coming into the country. Tariffs are usually the most popular way because they do at least raise revenues for the government. Quotas and voluntary export restraints do not. Okay, so that's a bit of a problem because when the country imposes tariffs or any other form of protectionism, they risk retaliation by their trade partners, and it happens all the time. So if they're going to do something like this, at the very least, they would like to gather some revenues to help compensate for the risks that they're taking. All right, now with this one, let's say consumer surplus falls by 500. Producer surplus rises by 300. So far, whatever this tariff has done, it has reduced these two. The net balance has gone down. Tariffs, though, have increased by 100. So altogether, there is a loss of $100 that is not gained by anyone, this is known as dead weight loss. It's just gone forever. It's the result of inefficiencies that were introduced by having a tariff, and nobody benefits from it. So it clearly makes society as a whole worse off, and yet they still continue to do this. And then finally, a voluntary export restraint. This is an agreement by foreign producers to limit their exports to the domestic country. So basically, the US government might say to Japan, listen, please don't sell us more than 2 million cars a year, because otherwise our auto industries will be in trouble. And so the Japanese might agree to it, but then they might expect something else in return. But the bottom line is, it's a, quote, voluntary export restraint. It means they agree to sell or limit the number of products they try to sell in the United States. All right, so what's going on here? We have one of our examples that we've seen before. We have a chart showing how much labor the US and Mexico need to produce oranges and avocados. Okay, so how do we determine these questions? Now, the opportunity costs, and by the way, I did put all this into Excel so we can figure it out, but we should be able to figure out how it's done, but it's nice to have Excel here as well. So for example, the US, if it makes oranges, okay, in order to make 1 pound of oranges, the US uses an hour of labor. This 1 hour could have been used to make 1/4 pound of avocados. Why? Because each pound requires 4 hours. Therefore, the opportunity cost of a pound of oranges is 1/4 of a pound of avocados. So you have to think about it as, if we use the hour to make a pound of oranges, what could we have done with that hour in terms of making avocados? Now that's a pretty low opportunity cost. That's sort of a hint that the US will almost certainly wind up specializing in oranges, because we don't have to give up a lot of avocados. Now, the other case, though, the avocados will have a very high opportunity cost, because in order to make 1 pound of avocados, the US uses 4 hours of labor. These 4 hours could have been used to make 4 pounds of oranges. These are only an hour each. Therefore, the opportunity cost of producing a pound of avocados is 4 pounds of oranges. Okay, so that's a steep opportunity cost. So it doesn't look like the US will end up making avocados if we do engage in international trade. Now we need to do the same thing with Mexico. All right, so I'll leave the table there where we can still see it. So with the oranges in Mexico, in order for Mexico to produce 1 pound of oranges, it uses 6 hours of labor. These 6 hours could have been used to produce 3 pounds of avocados, because they're 2 hours each. Therefore, the opportunity cost of producing 1 pound of oranges is 3 pounds of avocados. All right. On the other hand, what about the opposite? In order for Mexico to produce a pound of avocados, it must use up 2 hours of labor. These 2 hours could have been used to produce 1/3 of a pound of oranges, because it takes them 6 hours to grow a pound of oranges. Therefore, the opportunity cost of producing a pound of avocados is 1/3 of a pound of oranges. All right, so now I put together a nice little summary chart here. I might as well copy this into the document so you can see it, since I went through the trouble of doing this. And that way we can more easily answer the next set of questions. So based on this chart right here, who has the absolute advantage in the production of oranges? Oh, okay, I just realized we need both of these tables for this question, because the absolute advantage comes from this table. So I'll just keep them here side by side. Let's see, maybe I can fit them both right. No. That's right, we can see them both. So the absolute advantage, the US clearly has the absolute advantage in the oranges, because it only takes an hour for us to make a pound of oranges versus 6 hours in Mexico. But on the other hand, with the avocados, it takes them only 2 hours and us 4 hours. That means the absolute advantage belongs to Mexico. On the other hand, who has the comparative advantage in oranges? Well, let's look at this chart, and you can see that the US has a much lower opportunity cost. Okay, so the US should focus then on the oranges, obviously. And then in H, we want to know who has a comparative advantage in the avocados. If you look across the bottom row, that is clearly Mexico. So Mexico clearly has the comparative advantage due to its lower opportunity cost. And that's how we decide that. Up here, I might as well add US, since it only needs 1 hour to produce a pound of oranges, compared with 6 pounds in Mexico. Whereas down here with avocados, since it only needs 2 hours to produce a pound of avocados, compared with 4 in the US. Okay, so we're all set. We've got not only the right answers, but we also have explanations, which we don't absolutely need, but. All right, now for this part, what we're really looking at is this chart. And we combine that with our knowledge of how much labor each country has to produce. So I've also produced a chart with this in mind. So let me just go get it out of Excel. So basically all we have to do is take the US, let me add this to the header so we can see what's going on here. And Mexico has 900 hours of labor. And so it should be pretty clear how much of each we can produce. Um, let's see. Wait a minute. What did I do? Here we go. Actually, no. Let's just do it directly from what we have here. Um, so, in other words, the U.S. has 1,000 hours, so they can produce 1,000 pounds of oranges because we have 1,000 hours to work with, and it only takes um, 1 hour to make a pound of oranges. On the other hand, if we put all of our resources into the avocados, we could end up producing 250 pounds of avocados. Now, if we do the same thing with Mexico, keep in mind that, in fact, I'll tell you what, let me add one more step here. In other words, I want it to be clear where these numbers are coming from. So it's 1,000 over 1. Here it's 1,000 over 4. And that leaves us with 250 pounds of avocados. Now, with Mexico, they have 900 hours. So if they only grow oranges, and it takes 6 hours per pound, that means they can only grow 150 pounds of oranges, if that's what they choose to do. And then if they decide to only make avocados, then because each one only takes 2 hours, that means they can produce 2 hours per pound. That's 450 pounds of avocados. Now, let's assume, given these possibilities, that the two countries are producing and consuming both products. There's no trade taking place. So what I've done is I put together a little chart to summarize this very nicely. So without trade, the U.S. produces and consumes 125 pounds of avocados, 500 pounds of oranges. Mexico has 75 pounds of oranges and 225 pounds of avocados. So with that information in place, we're going to draw these curves. Okay, so for that, we actually need all of this information. All right, now they're going to tell us which product to put on each axis. Where are we? Here we go. So we want avocados in the vertical axis. Oh, God, come on. All right, now we should be able to do it. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to draw for the U.S. a production possibilities curve. Avocados are here, oranges are here. So the curve itself reflects how much of each good we can make. So the United States can make 1,000 pounds of oranges and 250 pounds of avocados, not at the same time, but we can draw or have 250 and 1,000. And Okay. If it doesn't specifically say this, but what we can also add here is where are they consuming right now? The US is actually producing 500 oranges and 125 avocados. So this is where they actually are at the moment. Okay, so they could have chosen to produce anywhere along this curve, but they choose to be here where we make 125 avocados and 500 oranges. So now we have to do the same thing for Mexico. So we have avocados here, oranges here. Now, their possibilities are 150 pounds of oranges or 450 avocados. And they choose to produce, though, and consume at 75 and 225. And so this is Mexico. Okay, so now the two countries agree to trade 200 pounds of oranges in exchange for 200 pounds of avocados. So what we need to do here is show this box without trade. And then what I've also done is I've created a box in Excel to show where they will be after trade takes place. And basically all you're doing is adding and subtracting 200 from each. Okay, so let's see, where do I have that? This is it. No, this is it. Okay, let's see what happened. Oh, that's right. No, sorry. This one doesn't belong here. You know why? We need not the chart with the current consumption. We need the chart with the specializations. That's why it doesn't look right. Hold on one second. In other words, we're assuming now that when we trade, that they're also specializing. It's not just the trade. We're assuming that both countries are specializing and then trading. So that means, there it is. This is the chart that I need. So this chart shows how much, if the US specializes in oranges, it will produce 1,000 oranges. If Mexico specializes in avocados, it will produce 450 pounds, I guess I should say. That's what's shown in this chart. All right, how do you know? Because if you go back up here to the top where it says how much can they produce, the US can make 1,000 pounds of oranges and Mexico can make 450 pounds of avocados, given how much labor they have. And so we end up with this as our specialization. But then when we agree to trade with each other, you can see that, in fact, maybe what I should do here is show the numbers. This 800 actually means 1,000 minus 200. This Mexico 200, this means 0 plus 200. This means 0 plus 200. And this one actually means 450 minus 200. Why do I say that? Because what's happening here is the US had 1,000 oranges, they trade away 200, now they're left with 800. Mexico had no oranges, they are able to acquire 200 from the United States, and we end up with 200 oranges in Mexico. For the avocados, the US had none. Now we have 200. And then finally, in Mexico, they had 450 avocados, which were traded. 200 of them were traded for oranges, and so we end up with 250. So this is where we are now. Oh yes, go ahead, Ashley.
Sorry, where does the 200 come from?
Oh, it says it right here.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it tells you in the problem that they've agreed to trade with each other 200 avocados for 200 oranges. That's the only way we can tell.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Now, it could have been something else. It doesn't have to be the same amount. It could be 250 oranges for, let's say, 175 avocados or something like that. I only chose the same numbers to make it work out nicely. So this is how much they will have after trade and specialization takes place. So for the U.S., you can just now read these off the chart. The U.S. will have 800 pounds of oranges. Mexico will have, oh, sorry, they want both. 800 pounds of oranges, 200 pounds of avocados. Okay. How much of each good will Mexico have? 200 pounds of oranges and 250 pounds of avocados. So how can you tell how much they've gained? We have to now compare this chart with the one that shows what they were consuming prior to specialization and trade. So let me just go grab that one back here. It was up here somewhere. This is it. So if we look at these side by side, you'll be able to tell right away how much we gained and lost. Okay, what's going on here? That's right, I'll get it from here. Why is it doing that? All right, I guess we have to paste it directly below. Excel is, Word is being a bit of a pain right now. So you should be able to tell just by looking at it. The US gained 300 oranges. How do you know? Because here we now have 800. Without trade, we had 500. So the US gains 300 pounds of oranges. What about our avocados? We now went from 125 to 200. So the US gains 75 pounds of avocados. Then when we come down here, how many oranges has Mexico gained? Let me split the screen so we don't have to scroll back and forth 8,000 times. So Mexico went from 75 to 200 oranges. So without trade, they had 75. Now they have 200. In fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Let me add one more detail here. The US, this 1,000 comes from 800 minus 500, comparing where they were with and without trade. Okay. Here, this 175 came about as the difference between 125 and 200. Now, this 125 from Mexico is the result of, for the oranges, it's equal to 200 minus 75. And then finally, avocados, Mexico went from 225 to 250. Now, how much does the world output increased of oranges or avocados. Well, you can tell if you look at the gains of the two countries. If the US gained 75 pounds of avocados and Mexico gained 25, that means the total output of avocados must have increased by 100 pounds of avocados. And how did we get that? That would be the result of simply combining the gains from each country. 75 plus 25 equals 100 extra pounds of avocados. And then down here, for the oranges, the gains are, the US gains 300. Oh, why did that happen? And Mexico gained 125 pounds of oranges. So between the two countries, they must have produced an extra 425 pounds of oranges. That's the only way this could work. So the US gained 300, Mexico gained 125. So their gain in oranges is 425. So this is the total amount that the two countries benefit. And so you can see trade not only made both countries better off because each country is consuming more of each good than they were before, but the total output for the entire world has gone up. And that's again because of specialization. So we're happy. Now, the only people who are not happy, of course, what's happened here is that, keep in mind too, though, with specialization, the US stops making avocados. So whoever was working in that industry is now looking for another job. And the same thing in Mexico. There, people who are working in the orange industry are now looking for a job. But so that's the trade-off. That's the loss that we suffer. But the gain is that everybody has more of both products. Okay. So this next question involves bananas. All right, so how does that work? Now, I think here I've already got some of these. Oh, maybe not. Let me see. I think that's all right. We'll draw them. So the supply and demand curves for the US. What's going on here? So what we're trying to show, the key detail here is this. You've got an equilibrium at $5 per pound of bananas. So when you draw this graph, oh, before we do that, let me shrink it up a little so I can see what I'm doing. This part is obviously not very hard. You just have to be a little careful with it because it's the consumer surplus that's hard to draw properly. All right, let's see how we can do this. All right, let me move this back up here just a little. All right, here we go. So what we're going to do is put the price, of course, goes here. The quantity goes here. When the price is 10, we have no quantity. So we start here at 10. When the price is 10, the quantity is 0. Or 0, when the price is 0, the quantity is 10. So this is our demand curve. It's usually easiest if you need to calculate consumer and producer surplus. You really would like to make sure that you correctly identify the two intercepts. Otherwise, you're going to have a problem. All right, let's try that again. All right, that's good enough. Now, that's our demand curve. What about our supply curve? Well, here's what we should do. Let's look for the intercept. The supply curve starts when the price is zero and the quantity is zero. So we start in the origin. Where do they cross? At the equilibrium point. And that would be right about here. So we have a $5 price and a 5-unit quantity. And that's what we were looking for. Okay, now for part B, they want, equilibrium price and quantity. That's easy. You can tell by looking at either the chart or the graph that the price and quantity, just by coincidence, are both 5. So the equilibrium price is 5 and the equilibrium quantity is 5. Now we need another graph. So you know what? We can borrow this one. We're looking for the consumer and producer surplus. And this is without trade, by the way. So all we have to do now is identify consumer and producer surplus on here. And so here's our consumer surplus, everything from the price line up to the demand curve. The base is here, that's 5. The height is here, that's 5. And then down here is our producer surplus. And it's basically, just by coincidence, it's the same thing. All right, well, that was nice and easy, but now look what happens. We need to introduce a world price. Oh, well. And the world price, as you'll see, is of course lower than the domestic price. So that means that we're going to have imports. Well, let's find out how that's going to work. I can just go back and grab this one again. Now, when we introduce this line, how do you know where it crosses the supply and the demand curves? They'll come from the chart. Okay, so let's come back and look at this chart. At a price of $3, the quantity demanded is 7, and the quantity supplied is 3. So we can fill those in. We're going to need them. So you can see there's going to be a shortage, domestic shortage, which will be satisfied with imports. Because we can buy all the product that we want at a price of $3 each. So the way this is going to work is that domestic producers will produce the first 3 units of this good. The remaining 4 that consumers want to buy, I should say domestic consumers want to buy at a price of $3 will be imported. Okay, because at such a low price, domestic consumers will want 7 units of this product. Domestic producers are only willing to produce 3. Anything beyond that, it's not profitable for them. So we have to get the rest of it from foreign countries, and that comes from imports. So the domestic quantity supplied is 3, and the domestic quantity demanded is 7, and therefore the imports are 7 minus 3, which is 4. Actually, I think it's supposed to be millions, isn't it? Yeah, millions of pounds per year. So let's just refer to that as 3 million pounds. And here we have 7 million pounds, and the imports will be 4 million pounds. Okay, that's all we needed for that. But now the challenge is to come up with the consumer and producer surplus. So once again, now it doesn't specifically say that we must draw a picture, but I think it's a good idea. So let's do that. All right, so now with such a low price, the consumer surplus is everything down to this new world price. So consumer surplus is 1/2 base times height. The base is all the way out to 7. The height is also 7. The producer surplus is just this tiny little square down or triangle down here. 1/2 base times height, and that's only 4.50. Okay, so and of course, total surplus is just equal to the sum of these two. So it's 2450 plus 450 equals 29. All right, so that's that. And now along comes a tariff. So now what do? The tariff is $1 per pound. So now we really have to watch it with this graph. It's going to get clumsy in a hurry. So I'll tell you what, let's draw a completely new one. Yeah, there's so much information on here. We have to really leave plenty of room. These things are a little tricky to draw properly. All right, so where's that? Oh, here it is. Here it is. $1. Okay, so we're taking this, we're just adding another line to it. All right, so what do we need to do differently here? We'll have the same basic setup. Okay, so really all that we need, let's do this. We have equilibrium is here. At $5. And Boy. Let's make that a little nicer. So the world price with just plain world price, we actually don't need that any longer. So let's do this just to keep it simple. Let's just draw this as the world price plus the tariff. Actually, no, we do need this other line. You know why? Because we have to figure out how much tariff revenue. All right, let's leave it in here. All right, I'll have to fix this over here. So the original world price was 3. World price plus tariff is just $1 higher. Now, the quantities were 3 and 7. If you look at the chart, you'll see that at a price of $4 up here somewhere, now we're looking at 6 and 4. So the imports will be reduced by from 4 to 2. Okay, so watch. So here we have 4 and 6. Wow, it is getting complicated. So what we're looking for now is that the new producer surplus, consumer surplus is here. And the new producer surplus has gone up a little bit compared to the last diagram. The base is now 4, the height is now 4. And what's even more important is that the tariffs, government has tariffs now. This is actually a rectangle. Base times height equals 2 times 1 is 2. So what's happened here is that we have the new total surplus equals new consumer surplus plus new producer surplus plus tariff revenues, which equals 18 plus 8 plus 2, which is 28. Okay. Now, what are we comparing this with? Previously, without the tariff, total surplus was 29. All right, we don't need this anymore. So right here, with the world price but no tariff, the total surplus proved to be 29. So here it was 29. Therefore, the dead weight loss must be 29 minus 28 equals 1. And if you want to show this on the graph, the dead weight loss would be these two triangles right here. Okay, so that's what the graph looks like. Now, as far as these are concerned, we can just now read them off of the table, of the graph rather. So let's split this up. All right, wait, oh my God, all the way down here. All right, here we go, here we go. The new domestic quantity supplied is 4 million bananas or 4 million pounds. The new quantity demanded is 6 million pounds. The imports are now 2 million pounds. And then here we have consumer surplus is 18, producer surplus is 8, and tariffs are 2. So therefore, total surplus is 28. And then down here, they ask us, what about the tariffs? Well, we've already answered that, but the tariff is 2, and it's actually $1 million, by the way. And the dead weight loss, as we've already seen, equals 29 minus 28 equals $1 million. Okay. So yeah, here's the numbers, but here's some of the reasons for what we just did. So you can see the logic in all of these cases. All right, let me just tidy this up a bit. And we're done. Wow, that was an ordeal. But like I said, don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to work on it. And so it's not quite ready yet. I'll have it up in the next day or so. But when you get, as soon as you see it there, you can start working on it. And so it won't be due until a week from Thursday just because it wasn't ready today. But I think even though this is a fairly time-consuming process, I think the actual midterm is actually a little shorter than this, but I'm not positive. But you have plenty of time, so don't worry, you'll get it. Okay. So in the meantime, I guess if there's no last minute questions, we can knock it off here. And on Thursday, then we can get back to the new material, which is chapter 12. Okay, we're looking at the factors that determine exchange rates in the long run and in the short run. Okay, back to the theory, that is. All right, so I'll post the solutions along with a spreadsheet if you want it. You can go through and see what I've done. I drew some pictures here too. Very nice. Oh man, I really went to town here, didn't I? So yeah, I'll put these up as well, so you can look at them if you want to when you're reviewing for this for the midterm. All right, so I guess I'll just see you all next time then.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye,
See you
Peter.
later. Okay, bye.